Is writing a book the price of admission for today's top leaders? As many of you know, I've got my seventh book out, The Indispensable Leader's Handbook, 100 leadership tips from a top-ranked leadership coach. It just came out on August 1st. That was last Thursday. And my guest today is none other than my editor, Meredith Norwich. Now, Meredith is a senior editor at Routledge. She's collaborated with academic and professional authors for 16 years, helping to bring their ideas and onto the page and into the world. Now she's working with experts writing business books for lifelong learning, focusing on topics such as leadership and design, cross-functional strategy, as well as nonprofit and arts management, those kinds of topics. Um, if you'd like to discuss a book project, and here's a little plug for Meredith, she'd be happy to hear from you. She's got all kinds of tips and things like that out on her collection of posts on LinkedIn, so be sure to check that out. And it's all of this that sort of makes Meredith the perfect guest to discuss this question with me today. And that's certainly an important one, is writing a book, the price of admission for today's top leaders. Meredith, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. It's really great to be here.
Yeah, it was fun working on this project with you. So
Definitely.
yeah, I thought it'd be a great platform for us to kind of talk about some of the things that we went through together. Well, let's start off with that first question. Is writing the book the cost of admission for leaders today? What do you think?
What do I think? Well, I think that like any important question, it's got a few different answers. And I think the first one is just something that I need to say for full disclosure purposes, whatever you want to think. Obviously, I'm an acquisitions editor who works on business books. So I'm going to say, yes, absolutely, everybody write a business book, except not. Because here's where the yes and no comes in, is that in today's world with every type of content imaginable available out there, does a book still have a gravitas to it? Yes. There's still something to be said, even among the Gen Z crowd, where they're looking to have print books. It's not like they've moved en masse to electronic communication. They want that book to hand and hold and bookmark and dog ear and all that stuff. So it's still definitely a valuable proposition to write a book. But the no part is it's only valuable if it's valuable to you. And the benefits, which are several, come with a cost. As you will know, writing a book takes time, it takes energy, it takes compromise. Maybe you don't go watch the football game because you got to stay home, you got to write the book. You need to be very willing to do all of that and to go there, in terms of research and exploration and thought crystallization. If that's just not your bag, if it doesn't work for you, then I would say you shouldn't. Actually, you should do other things. So it depends.
Yeah, I mean, that last point about sacrifice, I mean, I've written seven now, as I mentioned.
Yeah.
Each one takes me about 9 months to write.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and it is a sacrifice. And it's not just a sacrifice that I'm making, to be away from the family or whatever, but the
Right.
family makes that sacrifice too, because, if you're writing a book, you're absent. You do,
Right.
you're going and you're doing that. And it takes a lot of work if you're going to really do it well. I think some
Mm-hmm.
folks just slap anything together, and now with the chat GPT and that kind of stuff, it's probably getting a lot worse. But uh, yeah, if you're really going to legitimately get your ideas out of your head onto a page and make it make sense so someone can pick it up and read it and get something out of it, it takes time,
Mm-hmm.
and you got to be ready to sort of dedicate that time.
Mm-hmm.
As far as the
Absolutely.
question, my thought is it does give you an opportunity to showcase your expertise,
Mm-hmm.
because if you do a good job with it, you're coming back with ideas that are uniquely your own, and, it can set you apart from a pretty noisy, world out there. Everyone's trying to
Mm-hmm.
get a moment of that uh, sort of mind share, if you will. And, if you've got a book, you can hold up. I always say when I'm working with the consulting clients and my coaching clients, it's like, hey, you can hire the guy that read the book, or you can hire the guy that wrote the book. It's kind of the
Exactly.
choice. The choice is yours.
Mm-hmm.
What are some of the ways that writing a book can improve a leader's reputation? What are some of the things you're seeing with the authors you're working with?
I think there's internal and there's external improvement. Internally, writing a book gives you an opportunity as a person, as a leader, to explore your own thinking in a way that other shorter formats, social media posts, this kind of thing, just don't allow for. So as you are working through the writing process, who knows what your own thought process might trigger a change of perspective.
Hmm.
Also, a lot of folks, consultants like yourself, will work with their networks to serve as beta readers to get feedback at early stages of the manuscript. So there's that as well, that you're having some different perspectives shown to you as you're working on the book.
Hmm.
Then once you've finished and the book is published, then yes, again, it's being able to say, like you, I'm the person who wrote the book, literally.
Right.
And having that to present as something of an enhanced business card is something that I think is beneficial. And it gives people sort of a go-to. You can send people, just like a lot of people will use a website as maybe they're on LinkedIn and they're on Twitter and they're on whatever, but here's my sort of hub. The book can be the thought hub, so to speak,
Hmm.
which I think helps to sort of crystallize that person's brand, that person's value proposition in a wider audience's collective mind.
Yeah, I mean, I tend to agree. I think the books, for me anyway, have been a key part of my marketing strategy for my
Mm.
services, for many years.
Yeah.
Um, the very first book came out, I think, in 1990 or so.
Mm-hmm.
uh, and at that time, there was very little self-publishing. You had the vanity
Right.
press, but
Yeah.
you really had to compete for shelf space, and you had to convince a person like you, an acquisitions editor, to look at it and think about it and consider whether it fit with where they wanted to go with their business and whatnot. So it was a really a heady thing back then. I think now with the self-publishing, it's a little different. Like we talked about already, almost you can put almost anything out there, and
Mm-hmm.
I got
Mm-hmm.
a book. What I love
Yeah.
are the people that say I've got 57 books, and you go and you look at one or two, and you realize, yeah, no.
Not so much. I mean, I think, in a way, I think having these excuse me, these publishing routes open up can be a beneficial thing, but I think that that's why there's still something to working with a traditional publisher, like where I work, is that you have that sort of third party stamp, and that you have an editor, you have people who are making sure that the quality is there, so that you're able to, obviously an author, you've already got your platform, you've already got people who are interested in what you have to say, but that you can say, hey folks, it's not just me, this firm took a risk on, made an investment in my work because they found it valuable as well, which is just a nice backup, I think, to have. The other thing that I just wanted to mention with your saying about, I've got 57 books or whatever, the people who say that. And I think that's another thing that's important to bear in mind when you're considering whether or not to write a book, is if you're thinking of it as a box ticking exercise, that is going to really come across. I mean, I'm thinking about, and of course, I met this person because they're writing a book. So there's that. But in terms of how they've built their business, they're a consultant. They're also a professor at a top university in the States. They do not have a doctorate. They do not have a website. They do not have a logo. They do not have a tagline. Yet they have, through their own methods, mostly networking and just, doing the work, they've built a really successful business. Some people would look at their profile and say, oh, that's foolish of you. You should have this, this, and this. Well, they didn't need it. And so it's the same thing. If you think you need to write a book because there's this bandwagon that you absolutely must jump on,
Mm.
it is not going to benefit you, because you're not going to really be putting your all into it. And readers are going to know. They're going, like what you just said, they're going to go to your listing of 57 books and go, I don't think so, and click away.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. It's been a frustration of mine, just because, again, over the years, I know how much, sort of heart and soul goes into the stuff that I'm producing. And, it's your baby, you kind of take it personally, and when I
Right?
look at some of the stuff that's out there, you kind of go, wow, I mean, there's typos, there's really weak, thin content, and it's almost a couple that I've seen over the last few years. And I think maybe COVID maybe made people go heads down and get into publishing stuff because, they were looking for alternatives. But I mean, it's just really thin stuff. And I'm like, man, I don't know if I'd put my name on this. Yeah,
Mhm.
because
Mhm.
it's okay to say I've got 57 books, but just don't read any of them
Right,
because
right.
they're not that great. Uh,
Yeah, yeah,
that
that's not helpful.
that's yeah. I mean, some people legitimately have 57 really worthwhile books. Don't get me
Sure,
wrong;
of
it's not the
course.
number. You can be very productive, but
Hmm.
I think the difference is obviously the content. Um,
Absolutely.
I wanted to kind of go in a slightly different direction and kind of talk about the challenges that you're seeing authors go through once they've committed to writing a book. Let's say you've got them
Hmm.
under contract or whatever. What are some of
Sure.
the things that you're seeing people, you know, challenged by as they try to
Sure.
get a book done?
I think the main one has got to be time, and that's why I always, when I'm talking to an author, particularly a first time author, and we're going through the contract and we're figuring out what the manuscript submission date will be, I always say overestimate the amount of time you're going to
Yeah,
need because, excuse me, family things come up, all kinds of things come up, and like you just said, if you're going to do this with the sort of the best attitude, you're going to put your heart and soul into it, and you need to have the heart and soul sort of left over to do that, right, with the rest of your life.
right.
So that's definitely the challenge. I mean, I, will have books get delayed, unfortunately, and that's always what it is that an author will come to me and say, this consulting project went longer than I thought it was going to, or, God forbid there was a family illness, or any number of things.
Sure.
It's definitely time to get super into the weeds. Another one that comes up is with people who decide to do a lot of third party content, like illustrations,
Yeah.
the permissions, the money, the time. It's huge. And you don't necessarily realize when you're embarking on it, this isn't, even though we've got email and everything now, it isn't a matter of this is super quick. I've worked on some books where it took, that was the delay. It was like months to get a permission through, particularly from like a higher profile artist.
Hmm.
So you have to really budget that in. And that's why I often say, really think about not including a lot of illustrations in the book. Um, Especially any that are more sort of decorative, because it can take a lot more time and effort than you're anticipating that takes away from other things.
Hmm. Yeah. I mean, I feel like perhaps the greatest challenge for folks that are taking it legitimately, assuming that they've put a time aside.
Mm-hmm,
Clearly
mm-hmm,
you got to make sure you do. But it's the originality part.
mm,
Again, I'm seeing folks coming back with stuff that's really just it's existing content that you've
okay,
seen
yeah.
100 times before.
Mm-hmm,
Maybe there's an interesting little twist or something, but if
yeah.
it's not really broadly translated and interpreted,
Mm-hmm,
and the other thing that's really like, to me, it's like nails on a chalkboard. For those of you who don't know what chalkboards are, they're those things that people used to write, teachers especially, with chalk. Um, but it's when someone announces this grand leadership concept that's been around since 1987. you know? And while it's just new to them, they're
yeah,
proclaiming how great it is. And I'm sitting there going, really, like, wow, you know.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
And I've seen books come out on these topics,
right.
So I don't know. I think that the hardest thing to do is to really kind of come back with something original and take
Yeah.
the time to really develop that.
Yeah, no, that's an excellent point, and I think it's harder than ever now, just because there are so many new books coming out every year. There are so many different publishing routes, and then of course there's all the content creation going on online. Um, there, at this point, I guess I could be proven wrong, but at this point, I do think that there is nothing new under the sun.
Hmm.
What's new is what an individual author has to bring to it.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, and that's the heart and soul part, right? I mean,
Hmm.
you got to bring you to the project,
Yes.
and if you can talk from a place of experience, then I think that's uniquely you.
Hmm. Absolutely.
You
Absolutely.
know, what's interesting is folks with very little experience cranking out books as authorities. And I'm kind of
Hmm.
like, where did you pay your dues to be able to have
Hmm.
this authority? You know,
Yeah, exactly.
unless you invented it. Like if you truly
I mean, I
invented
guess there's
something,
that. Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
but otherwise, you may not really have the experience. You just have a concept or a theory
Hmm.
until
Hmm.
you've actually done it and experienced it and seen people work through whatever it is your thesis is.
Yeah. 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 That's a good point.
Um, I'm wondering, back to the differentiation thing, how hard is it for authors to differentiate themselves, or kind of on that topic of originality?
Yeah, I think that is a challenge. But I think that's where already having a sort of robust platform comes in, which is you're not going to have the book establish you. You already
Yeah,
have to be somewhat established. And so you have already differentiated yourself with that specific audience whom you're directing your work to. So to some extent, I think you've already done it. And I think it probably is about, I mean, tell me what you think, but I think it's also about kind of what you were saying earlier, authenticity,
mm,
that nobody, I mean, you're not the only person talking about leadership in the world,
sure, right.
but you're the only Jim Kerr, that's kind of your differentiator. I mean, is that kind of how you look at it too, or?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like with the book that you and I worked on, the 101 leadership tips came from 30 years of leadership coaching.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
Yeah, now the concepts in there maybe, or are some of them I think are original, some of them are, reinterpretations of stuff that someone
sure.
else introduced or whatever. But that's really where I think the magic happens is you reinterpret a concept based on experience. Now it's no longer a theory,
Right.
you
Mm-hmm,
know, because it's backed by these experiences. And what's kind of, cool about the coaching book, and I'm really promoting this more as a leadership book to help people who are leaders adopt a coaching process to become better leaders. So it's not really a
mm-hmm,
book for coaches, it's a book for leaders. And those tips are all applicable. And I mean, maybe I'll just grab it and kind of show
I mean,
folks.
show the people. It looks good.
That's the book. Like I said, it just came out on Thursday, and Meredith was my editor on this one. Um, but yeah, the each tip has three different ways to implement it. So if
Uh-huh.
you're a
I love that part.
supervisory, you know,
Yeah.
person, you've got a tip. If you're a senior executive, you've got a tip. If you're a middle manager, you have a tip. And it's
Mm-hmm,
it's ways of translating that simple tip into practice.
mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I think that's the thing that's different, in this book versus any other book on leadership.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I agree. That's actually one of my two favorite things about your book, how you approached it. That sort of jumpstart for not forgetting that. Because I think a lot of people, sort of younger or even middle management, they'll look at a book for leaders and they're not the CEO, so they think it's not for them. You know what I mean? And I think a lot of leadership stuff, it does tend to be directed more at the tippy top. And I really like that you brought in every level of leadership. I think that's terrific. Another thing I also really appreciate about it is that ideas crosswalk that you have,
Mm.
where you're sort of tying different parts of the book together. I think that makes it a lot more useful. You know?
Yeah, I
So,
mean, I really want the book to get used, right? And when you and I were talking about it during the acquisition process, um, I know that was one of the things that sort of resonated with you. And I
mm-hmm.
kind of thought of it as kind of funny, just by the way. I was like, yeah, this will make it a little more useful. But I really didn't think of it as this big
Uh-huh.
concept. But it does. I do, now that it's finished and I see what it really looks like. I do feel like it makes it more referenceable because now you can kind of go in and say, okay, this one's on leadership as a choice, but it's referencing me back to something about trust building in another chapter.
Mm-hmm.
And now I can,
Yeah.
as a reader, I can kind of go, well, maybe there's a couple of three different tips in here that I should use right at this moment. Because I started
Hmm.
by looking at this one, but
Yeah.
there's a couple more that are related. So yeah, let's talk a little bit about the acquisition process. Can you help people understand what it's like to work with you to get in the Routledge camp?
Sure. Yeah.
Stable?
It usually starts with, and sometimes folks will have a book proposal already put together, and they'll share that with me. Other times, people will not. They're starting really fresh. They've not done anything. So I do also frequently talk to people who they just have an idea. Maybe they've written some articles. Maybe they have an outline. It depends. I talk to people at various stages of the
Hmm.
process. So, but generally, that's where it starts. As you and I did. Talk through the project, see. Does it sound like it's a viable? Is it a book? Or is it something else? Um, and then going from there, that book proposal is always the kernel of everything. And I have a set of guidelines that I provide to folks that they can follow or not, but it just gives an indication of what you need to say. What's nice about doing that sort of formal document is it does a couple of things. Is it gives me what I would need to really evaluate the project,
Hmm.
you know, all the brass tacks parts. But then also, if I'm moving forward with it, it's what forms the core of what I present to our editorial board. So it's important on that level. But it's also helpful for an author because one of the elements of that proposal is an annotated table of contents to give me and then the board a really clear sense of the book's content, its flow, everything. So when you as an author have put that together, what you've just created is an outline for your book. And then when you go to write the book, you can just fill in the outline. Essentially, I'm making obviously that's it's not quite as simple as that, but it does give you something really solid to work with. So just like the process of writing a book itself, it helps you with your own thought process, and then it helps boost your profile. Same deal. The proposal helps you with the writing, and it helps me, to get the book where it needs to go. Assuming the proposal looks good, I would do is then take it to our editorial board. Reference. They're the ones who will, they evaluate every project, they give feedback, and they give a yay or nay decision on whether or not I can offer a contract. Maybe really thinking about, correct me if I'm wrong, but some of the really important elements of the proposal, what makes it stand out, is first of all, it refers back to what we were just talking about, the distinctiveness or uniqueness of your idea.
Hmm.
Exactly the originality. Why, in a sea of books, would anyone pay their time, money, attention to read it? Uh, that's the big thing. What's your USP? Related to that, you need to show that you have a very firm understanding of the rest of the landscape,
Yeah.
that you've looked. I mean, maybe you already know a lot anyway because you're an expert in the field, but that you've also gone on Amazon or wherever and you've
Hmm.
looked, hey, has anybody else done this that I just didn't know about? Fair, what am I doing differently? And by the same token, oh, there are no books about this at all.
Hmm.
Hmm, that's something to reflect on as well. Is this really a book or is it something
Hmm.
else? So
Hmm.
that's important. And then the other really important part is referring back to that sort of author platform where you've already established yourself. What have you done to do that?
Hmm.
Are you hosting a podcast? Are you speaking? Are you involved in community work that gets your word out there?
Hmm.
However you choose to do it, that you have done it and that you understand the importance of continuing to do that in order to support sales of the book.
Yeah, I mean, I think the platform part is always the trickiest for
Mm-hmm.
particularly first time authors.
Yes.
If you don't have a weekly column in a magazine or you don't have a podcast or whatever, how are you going to get people to even know this book exists?
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
I thank goodness for the modest platform that I have. I've got a lot of good folks in there that are willing to kind of help out. We did the book launch last week. I had a dozen people come on and
Yeah,
talk
that's
about
great.
their favorite tip and so on. I mean, that's really critical stuff to be able to get the word out that there's this book that you might be interested in
Mm-hmm.
because it's really noisy out there.
It is.
Um, I'm wondering, you mentioned this earlier and we didn't have a chance to go deeper, but I think it's worth, again, some more consideration particularly anyone in the audience who's interested in possibly writing a book. And that's,
Hmm.
how does a book compare with other forms of content like blogs and podcasts and all that? What's your take on that?
Do you mean sort of why are books still a thing?
Yeah.
Yeah. I think
In fact,
cultural.
Meredith, that was
Yeah.
the original question. Is why are books still a thing?
Well, we could talk about that all afternoon. But yeah, there's a lot on book history, but I think it's a cultural thing, um, and people still like I think I said earlier that it's got this sort of gravitas to it, that it's something you can hold. And again, ebooks aside, but because print is still quite popular, I think that's part of it. I know there, and I'm not going to be able to cite a study or anything, but I know there's research out there that says, in terms of memory and retention, that being able to actually physically locate, and I
Mm,
realize this is somewhat ableist, but um, being able to physically locate in a print book a reference helps to re reinforce, that's the word, reinforce that memory. So I think that's a big reason why even younger folks who are quote unquote born digital are still looking for that print reference,
mm,
because it works that way.
mhm,
um, Even taking print out of it, though, again, it's this imprimatur that having a third party, if you post on Instagram, Mark Zuckerberg didn't approve your content, you can just do it. If you're working with a more traditional publisher, you can say, well, this other party also thought this was worthwhile,
right.
and I think that's part of it too.
Yeah, I agree. And
Yeah,
you know,
I was going
I
to say,
did.
why do you keep publishing books?
Yeah,
Why
I
is it a
mean,
thing for
well,
you?
yeah. For me, the marketing was the original reason,
Hmm.
like because I really didn't have like a PR aspect of my business or a marketing arm or whatever. I was doing it myself. So
Yeah.
what would be cool is I'd publish an article or a book, and then people would read it and call me.
Hmm.
And that's literally what drove my business for, I don't know, 25 years probably.
Yeah.
You know, Now recently with all this sort of explosion of digital content, that's not the formula any longer. You need
Hmm.
something else to really set you apart. I'm glad I had a 25-year head start. I mean, I think
That's helpful. Yeah.
that makes a difference, for me today. Um, but yeah, I think there was a certain gravitas to being able to say, I wrote the book. Um, but when I compare it to other things, which I have, newsletters and podcasts and articles and all that, I think the difference is really a couple things. One is permanence.
Mm, definitely.
Like a physical book it's like, unless someone burns it,
It's yours.
it exists.
Yeah.
It's there. Also, the degree of depth you can go, like versus a blog where you might come in and talk about a topic and give, here's 5 ideas related to the topic. In
Hmm.
a book, you can really go in and dedicate the time that some topics require to really hammer home the point. So I think
Yeah.
there's a depth element to it that's also, I think, important. And then the other thing is I feel like, and take the podcast, which I started a few years ago, it's episodic.
Right.
So
Uh-huh.
I'm introducing concepts, dribs and drabs with my guests like you that are talking about, special topics and so on. But with a book, it's like this is the episode, and we're going to go really, really deep on it for 250 pages or 300 pages,
Yeah.
whatever. So I do think there's that huge difference,
Yeah.
and that's what probably keeps me writing.
Yeah.
Just
Yeah. That's all great points. Definitely
just that.
agree.
So, I'm looking at the time. Our time's running up. I want to make
Okay. Yeah.
sure. Yeah, I know. I could talk to you
That
the
happens.
rest
Yeah.
of the day. Yeah. Um, Really enjoying it. Thanks, Meredith, for coming on. But let me
Okay.
ask this one last question, and maybe it can leave a thought or two for our audience. And that's, what tips can you give someone who's considering writing their first book?
First book. Okay. First of all, first and foremost, do not let imposter syndrome drag you down. Um, Nobody has to tell you that you can write a book. If you have the experience, if you have the desire, put all that together and do it. Don't worry about, yes, other people have written books before. Yes, they have. You haven't. Just try it. Would be the first thing. And then I think this is for first time, but it's for, sort of multi-time authors too. Of course, multi-time authors will already kind of know this, but a reminder. Only you can write the book that you're going to write, but it isn't about you. It's always about the reader. You always have to be thinking about who they are, what you can give them. That has to be your focus.
Yeah. Excellent points, and ones I've kind of been reminded of as I went through this process from book one through the one we just did.
Sure.
Yeah, we got to keep the reader in mind always. You're really writing for them, um, and really great advice, Meredith. Thanks so much for joining me today. I really
Thank
appreciate it,
you. It was great.
and
Thanks so much.
I look forward to making our book, a runaway bestseller.
Yes. Sounds good. I'm here for it.